Okay, for my second video, I did a mini lesson on what exactly sound is. This lesson was done on a day when we were released early for heat, so I just took the time to teach a science concept that I knew was going to be one to get that was going to be a stretch to get to at the end, because I only have one class. So I started out the class with giving a bell ringer, asking students what exactly is sound, and I had students share out. Well, think, pair, share. I had them think by themselves, write it down, share with the person sitting next to them, and then share out to the entire class. After we got through discussing what exactly they believed sound was, we went and got the dictionary definition, which sound is the reception of waves and the perception of the brain. Then I showed a video for the science of sound. In the video, I asked them to make observations, think to themselves about how different objects move as a reaction to sounds, and to begin to perform hypotheses, or to form hypotheses about what they believed sound, how they believed sound moved. So I included a video. The video linked to a really cool video, a sematics video, where it showed how different things moved in accordance to sound. It slowed down, used slow-mo, it used, mostly slow-mo to show how things vibrated. Then I talked about how exactly do we hear. I asked them to turn and talk to a partner about how exactly they hear sound. And from there, we talked about the anatomy of an ear, how the outer ear is kind of like a funnel, and inside of the ear we've got the inner ear canal, which funnels the music down towards three small bones, which move in accordance with one another down to the cochlea, which moves back and forth and moves the liquid inside of it, moving tiny little hairs in a wave, and those movement of the hairs connect to the cochlear nerve, which goes into our brain. Just a quick little synopsis of how we discussed it with our groups. Then we talked about how exactly sounds are created, and we talked about the students talked about the different sounds, they talked about different kinds of instruments, and then we took a look at specifically the different types of instruments and the sound and the way that they move. We looked at guitars and how the strings moved. We looked at wind instruments and how specifically inside a flute, because it's a very basic instrument, how the sound moved inside of the tube. And then we looked at drum heads and how exactly the head of a drum would move when it's hit. From there, the students actually did a study. I brought instruments in and allowed students to kind of play with the instruments and kind of figure out how they sounded. I brought in all sorts of random types of instruments, including drums and maracas and guitar and ukulele, and I brought in some really weird ones like boom whackers and this duck call sound and train whistles and all sorts of weird stuff. So during this lesson, I mostly was focusing on how was my presentation. I felt that I optimized relevance because of applying the concept of sound to instruments they may already know and allowed them to experiment with those instruments. Sustaining effort and persistence, I allowed them to foster collaboration by allowing them to discuss with one another what they believed, and community through the whole class discussion. I developed self-assessment and reflection by having students look at their own perceptions of sound and how they perceive sound to interact. I highlighted patterns and big ideas and relationships between the different instruments. Although all of them make different sounds, they have different ways of conveying that noise and different ways that the air is moved to create those patterns. I helped them transfer the information by talking about three very basic examples and allowing them to experiment, used on those examples, other different types of instruments. And I helped guide the processing of information and visualization by showing the ear and showing them how exactly things move within the ear. I also think that I forgot to mark it, it encouraged exploration in their learning. For the accessible PowerPoints, I do have it in an outline view. I used the basic format. Some of them I needed to alter slightly just so it fit outside of the pictures. Slide layout, it was very simple. It had a home tab and allowed it to drop down to see the slides that you were coming in. I'm not sure about the reading order and how it would read, and I didn't go in to change it, so I'm sure that it does not read in the order that I would like it to read. For the alt text, again, I've never had a student that has been hard of hearing. I've never had a student that is needed to use alt text, but I think in the future I will use alt text more often. I did not use it in this presentation. I didn't have any lists, so I didn't mark that. My links, it was meaningly describing the situation. I explained what it was going to, and then I put it on the here so they knew what exactly they were clicking to actually make sure that they went to the right area. I didn't use tables. The color was sufficiently visible. I made sure that the colors that I used on the background was able to easily be seen from any point in the room and was far distinguished from the other colors on the page. I didn't use any math or science, and I didn't use, well, the audio and video were not captioned because it was mostly a song in visual representation. So it's kind of hard to caption a sound. For the principles, I said I used text, video, and audio representations by pre-teaching, allowing students to do the bell ringer to access their prior knowledge about sound, and using multiple examples by allowing students to experiment with different pieces of information, different pieces of instruments, to allow them to experiment and see how sound moves those objects. I chunked information into small pieces for students, which allowed them easily to be able to comprehend all of the different areas of science that we were covering, whether it be the physics or the biology standpoint. I provided and promoted autonomy by allowing students the opportunity to plan out where they needed to go to try out the different instruments. I allowed them to self-monitor themselves, and I allowed them to self-express and self-assess near the end by allowing them to use what they had learned throughout the lesson to assess their learning later. I provided authentic and purposeful outcomes by applying it to information that they can actually take and use later, by bringing in real-world objects for them to use. Exploration and experimentation, again, I talked about that briefly before. And I provided opportunities for collaboration by having them really experiment. How do we use these instruments? How does the way they move affect the sound that we hear? How does it affect the way that the air moves around that instrument? Thank you for taking the time to watch these videos.